Oh, we on. We have started. Hello, everybody. My name is Ben, and I am with Will. Will is living in Montana, and I live in Florida. We are both veterans of the Marine Corps, and this is first. Will interviewed me for 2 hours, and I basically went straight for 2 hours. So today I'm gonna try to, and let Will tell his story because he's got quite the story to tell. And what else did I want to say? That's about it. Oh, the only other thing is that Will did 2 deployments to Iraq. I did 1 deployment. The first deployment that Will did, we went there together. We spent some of the time together, most of it not really, but it was the same deployment that we went on together to Iraq. The first time. And then the second time that he went, I was not with him. I was probably enjoying Southern California. At Camp Pendleton. So, okay, so let me just start by, unless you just want to jump into it, I did have a few questions that I jotted down. Do you mind if I ask them, Will?
Of course. Ask away.
Okay. I hope this sound is coming through good. If not, whatevers. Okay. What was your rank when you did the 2006 deployment?
So I picked up Lance Corporal right before I went to Iraq, and then I picked up Corporal in actually August 1st of 2006. So before we left country, I picked up Corporal.
So you were still in Iraq when you picked up Corporal?
That's correct.
Okay, now when you did that second deployment, what was you were a corporal?
Correct.
And you EAS'd, you got out of the Marines as a corporal?
That is correct.
Okay. Now, when you were were you part of 9th ESB, so to say, as a communicator?
In my second time, you asking? Or
No, the first deployment.
Yeah, I was part of 9th ESB. I was a comm guy. I actually replaced, there was 3 people slated for the position that Danielson and myself did, but we had a little less of the workup than the other people did, and I went over there. I was with 9th ESB headquarters company.
Okay, so that's something I had jotted down. I guess I didn't really know that. I didn't really know that we had a comm shop with 9th ESB. I guess I didn't really. So it was part of H&S company, not support company. And
correct.
Where was you were in Camp Hansen, like where was your shop?
My shop was right underneath the headquarters companies, like office underneath the first sergeant and what do you call it? Company guns office right underneath it. The first floor, right by across the street from the motor pool.
Got you. That makes sense. Hey, listen, 20 years later, we're still learning. I didn't even know. Okay, so there were some people that were supposed to go, and they didn't really. Something might have happened. I kind of heard something like that from somebody else also. Not with regard to your guys' job, but somebody else. So did they put you there specifically to be they needed a communicator with the security platoon? Was that sort of the rationale?
They gave us 2 communicators to the security platoon. Danielson went with first team, I went with second team, and then when Danielson got injured, I ran both teams.
Now he got like a Purple Heart. There was like an IED or something
No,
like that.
he actually hurt himself when he was playing volleyball. He rolled or twisted his ankle, and they sent him over to Al Assad for a bit, and then I was running both of them, and so he actually healed up, and then he went back to the first team.
Gotcha. Okay, so I guess I basically kind of wanted to just talk about both deployments. not just because of brevity, just because of the time, and if that's okay with you, I guess we could do other videos or whatever. But because I feel like, not that I'm diagnosing you or whatever, but if PTSD is something that you're, gonna divulge that you suffer from, I divulge that I suffer from that to whoever will listen. Obviously we have that because of what happened in the past. So I kind of wanted to, briefly go through both, deployments to sort of just paint the picture, because I think that people, they don't really, even myself, the details matter and they don't matter at the same time. Meaning that sometimes people that never been to war or never been in the military, they just don't understand it at all. And I think it's important for them to understand it, because, it gives a sense of, what happened, when somebody's on a macro view and they're the president or they're Congress or whatever, or they're a voter, and they're saying, hey, let's go do this. But you've got hundreds of thousands of people going and doing stuff. What's the effect? What are they really doing? I mean, don't we want to know what they're really doing? How does it really affect them later on? Because obviously that is what PTSD is. So the story, it's not everything, but it is important. And, because I remember once saying to somebody that it was in our deployment, we didn't have it like the Vietnam guys, with their war was harder or whatever. And he was like, you know what? He thought it was like, it's all the same thing. Like, you know what I mean? If it affects you, it affects you. Like, don't try to slice and dice it, whatever. So anyways, with regard to 2006, to go in sequential order, maybe I'll just kind of prompt it. I don't think I was there from the very beginning, but in February it was it was maybe like the second mission, third mission, and it was kind of like a road repair, and we went through. So to basically break it down for the general public, 9th ESB Engineer Support Battalion, their mission was construction, basically, just to dumb it down. Was construction, was either road repair, was route clearance, was which I guess is kind of construction, not really, but and building different posts for the Iraqi Army. And Will was part of a group of guys and one female until she passed that were doing security, that were doing armed security, for the unit, because we didn't. People always think, when they talk to me, they always say, "Oh, you guys went with infantry." I don't know if people have ever said that to you.
No, they never asked me if I went with infantry. It just, if I share a little bit, they understand that I did a lot of similar tactics in a way of kicking in doors, clearing houses and stuff. But there's definitely a different perception of what Marines do and other people do. Can you hear me clearly?
Yeah, I can hear you clearly. I might have to. I might unplug it. Let's see. You still there?
So, yeah, I'm here.
Yeah, it's better. Yeah, so from my vantage point, I didn't typically see, infantry with us. Okay, any sort of infantry unit, whether it was mechanized or conventional infantry, Marines or otherwise.
So I used to call in birds for, which would be helicopters, to go in front of us sometimes. I used to call in for some tanks for some type of support to be able to go in front of us, to be able to clear the way if there's any IEDs. We used to call them crunchies. Worked with mortars from different companies, or actually different battalions, actually calling them for mortars and also artillery rounds, to be able to support us while we were doing the road repairs. So there's been plenty of times where people were engaging in us, and we had to have additional support, or we had to have additional support to clear the way as well.
Okay, I didn't. So that's something that I didn't really. I might have known parts of that, but I didn't. I didn't know that full picture. Um, I did know about air support because I kind of was very into listening to the radio. I would, and you can hear at least. From my understanding, you could hear everything. You know, whatever channel you'd go on, you could kind of. It was almost like the old-fashioned the phones in the house, where if you're on a different room in the house with the phone, you could still hear the radio traffic. And for example, in February, you know, I was in a 7-ton, and I didn't hear anything like that, but there were constant situation reports that were being sort of communicated between the vehicles with the convoy commander, communicated to the combat operations center on the base, and there was just a lot of communicating. There was just a constant communicating, and I guess you're somebody that was trained, schoolhouse trained as a communicator. So, do you feel like that gave you a leg up on the radio than somebody such as myself when I was using the radio? That we were, you know, or like, what was the purpose of having? Is it just the fact that you were designated, or that was there probably was, because there were times where I was kind of stuck with the radio, or I was like the radio person for that vehicle, let's say, and there might have been times I didn't really know what I was doing sometimes. So I guess that's where that schoolhouse training comes in, is in those type of moments, right?
So being a radio operator is more than just manning a radio. Like, for instance, the vehicles, after Danielson left and after a lot of support company moved over to Al-Assad, I had to make sure that all the trucks had the proper fills, set the right times, teaching people how to communicate on the radio, doing many different classes of teaching people how to do that, calling in for air support, fire support, calling in for a medevac, and knowing how to use the radios and actually going between them. Then also being able to troubleshoot them when needed. It's more than just pressing the push to talk button on it. There's a lot more that goes involved with being a communicator than just answering it.
That sheds a lot more light on it. Was there ever a trained, so to say, schoolhouse trained or course trained fire support person that would be able to call, airstrikes or something like that? Was there anybody that would ever go with us that was went through a course in that?
So I was the guy that would actually be the one calling it in. Like, called in mortars a couple times to be able to stop people from shooting at our vehicles, redirecting that. So that would be on myself or Danielson, or even the staff NCO and officer that should know the training.
Yeah, that makes sense. That they would get, if you were an officer or if you were staff NCO, you maybe got some additional training in that. But you're saying there wasn't necessarily somebody from like Anglico or that was like a forward observer. I don't know I forget the MOS name, but it was basically an artillery guy that an 08 something that went through some sort of course where they go through an official training and how to call for fire and direct fire and that nature. You're saying we didn't have anybody like that was attached to the unit?
That would, again, like I was saying, it would be me. I was the one that was able to give them the pause, who were position where we're at, where's the position that they are at, so that they could be able to engage and then be able to do course correction. There was this one time this dude was shooting at George Pierce, and we had to engage him. It was over by the Euphrates River, and we dropped some mortars over there so that these guys would stop shooting at us.
Yeah. Okay. And that answers that. That answers Yeah, that's interesting. That doesn't, God forbid, that doesn't minimize your. Did you? I mean, that just shows how you really stepped up and how important, how pivotal it was. And I'll try to explain that maybe in a second. But um, did you get, as a part of your comm school training in directing fire?
Correct.
You did get training in that. So it doesn't have to necessarily be a forward observer.
So a forward observer is more on a smaller unit scale, about 1 to 2 people. They're usually behind enemy lines. They're the ones that are doing more of a recon mission than actually doing what a communicator does. They are a little bit further out, like I said, than a person that is integrated within a company or into a team.
I got it. So, but there's nobody that. It just, to me, it seemed, you're saying there is not a specific. Say you would have stayed in. You did 4 years, correct?
Correct.
Say you would have stayed in. I don't know, a whole career or whatever, 20 years. Would they have sent you to some sort of additional course in fires support?
So I'm trying to understand what you mean by that, because calling in fire is not that hard. It's not that difficult.
That's why I'm lost in the sauce with this.
It's a traditional 9-line of when you're calling for a company. You're giving them the position that you're at, and then where the target is at, and then you're actually having them correct rounds, and then you'll give them. The verbiage actually escapes me at the moment, but how to redirect the rounds to be able to go on target. It's just following a 9-line that came in with a regular grid, just very similar to calling in a 9-line for an escalation of force or to a medevac. So, to ask about that, if I want to, say I want to recon, I would actually have a different situation that I would be calling in. But at the same time, it still would be talking to the birds overhead to be dropping rounds on target, or calling back to a more rear about dropping mortars on target. So we used to have to call in for loom rounds when we were actually invading an area, or we would call in for HEDP, high explosive point detonation. But it's just following a script.
Yeah. Okay. I appreciate it. You're definitely telling me stuff I'm definitely interested in it. It's something that I like I said, I would listen a lot, and it was even from I don't know the reasoning behind the first mission that I went on off the base. It was a ATSB corporal who was the driver. He was a motor T guy, and it was a 7-ton, and he said to me, here's what I need you to do. I need you to listen to that radio, and if you hear anything important, tell me. But it kind of got ridiculous because they were almost continually talking on it the entire hours and hours and hours on this convoy, and it was a road repair, and it was just continual talking. So it kind of got to a point where he was like, "Hey, just tell me if it's really important, or something like that." Because, like you said, there was a lot of communication, and then later in the deployment. I even once heard a pilot say to the person in our unit, it might have been you, let's just speak regular. Did they ever say that to you on the radio? Let's go. Let's not use the official. Let's just talk.
When things are getting into more of a chaotic situation, it's just better just to speak frank than actually to go by what the SOPs say. Because the SOPs are there to actually keep people in a certain type of parameter and some type of respect and an understanding of what you're supposed to be able to speak. But most people, like you say, speak frank. They're doing it in a way to be able to get shorthanded knowledge instead of going line 1, break, line 2, break, line 3, break. It fluffs it up, and it sounds great when you're in garrison, But when shit is actually hitting the fan, you want to get the immediate threat under cover instead of actually saying line one break. You're giving them the information to be able to both make sure that you're safe and make sure that the job is getting done effectively.
Yeah, so to kind of circle it back, when I said about the whole infantry thing is, there wasn't, infantry with our unit. So I guess at some point, whether it was based on previous units or whatever, because we were kind of late in the game, I guess. March 2006 was the invasion of Iraq, and then we were already there. February 2006. 2003 was the invasion of Iraq in March, and 2006 in the beginning was when we went over there. So they obviously had this concept of, listen, let's pull people from, because there was no security platoon in garrison of 9th ESB, right? We didn't have that as a normal part of the unit. The units don't have that. And they weren't going to attach infantry to our unit. It was something I thought about, just kind of, Lance Corporal, I'm in Mount Fuji, we're doing the training, we're doing the whole thing. And it was something that I noticed because I said, oh, okay, they took some guys from our platoon. And, and it made sense because it was like, okay, they basically have to have, I guess at the same time, maybe they could have just had the job set, just have everybody, no, they're going to need some people, that was the way they decided to do it, for better or for worse, that was the way that they decided to do it. They didn't basically, probably some units were doing it other ways, honestly. There were probably platoons that didn't have a designated, maybe security platoon, and maybe Army or whatever, other Marine units that were maybe just, you do your route repair, you do whatever it is, and you designate some gun trucks, and you say, okay, these are your gun trucks. But it was interesting to watch. I could tell you, I remember really specifically a lot of the tact that when you talk about the communicating with the radio and also the layers, like you said, I don't obviously some of the stuff you were mentioning I didn't really even know about, but just the layers of the coordination and trying to work together in a really specific way. It wasn't really just like having a conversation on the phone, like, hey, dude, whatever. It was more like, okay, we're, basically in one spot, let's just, for an example, static, to use the term, and, these people are trying to kill us, essentially, right? These people are mortaring us. And we're trying to pinpoint where these people are at. So, you might, fire different machine guns at them. You might drive towards where you think the fire is coming from based on, where you could see it coming from, or use aircraft or just basically whatever steps, because it seemed like to me at the time there wasn't really the option of like, hey, we're going to just leave and go back to the base. That didn't really seem like the option. It was more like, hey, as long as we're here, we're going to get targeted periodically or often or whatever it might be, and we're going to need to respond to whatever these threats are, because if we allow them to just continually do it without responding, eventually one of their mortars is going to hit one of the Marines on the job site and somebody's going to die. So that was basically, tell me if I'm wrong, but that was from my perspective. So also security platoon, another thing that they were doing besides kind of all these layers and the communication you and Danielson were doing, and staff NCOs and the officers, but was also, and there was just communication between the trucks themselves, almost, I won't say every Marine's a communicator, but in a certain way every Marine's a communicator, right? Because if your vehicle has a radio, there's an ability, you can pick up that radio, and we know how to, maybe you haven't been through the course, but you still, were able to communicate. I know I did on different times off the base where I would use the radio, and, that was kind of, I would even check it out from comm on TQ, and, they would give me the radio and everything like that. I wrote down all the different channels and call signs and everything like that. But anyways, the other thing I remember security platoon was just seeing it was like an escort. It was almost like if you ever watch one of these funeral escorts. I don't know if you ever see them. They have them in Montana. Around here, they do them all the time. Where somebody died, they put them in one of these limousine, one of these hearses, whatever, and they have or like a presidential escort. And we were kind of going. We had our gun trucks too in the convoy, but security platoon was kind of escorting. They were and they were doing a lot of maneuvers. And at different intersections, they would stop and they would, and even dismounts. People would get out of the vehicles, either at different spots maybe on the highways and stuff, and also I remember in Fallujah, in like downtown Fallujah in February, and the traffic was real slow, and we were just kind of crawling along, and people are coming out of the shops and stuff, and everybody's like staring at us, and I can remember, you guys would get out of your Humvees, certain guy, obviously not the driver, would kind of keep, and you were kind of like. It was kind of like an old school kind of, like, at least to me, just in like the beginning of the deployment, it was kind of like, I wouldn't say cool, it's like a bad word for it, but like, it just seemed kind of like old school, like it was, but at the same time, it seemed very, it was very impressive, because I saw guys that I knew, and I was like, wow, how do they move their body like that? It almost looked like an athlete, you remember, with like the way they had the rifle or the saw, and it was maneuvering and kind of just, kind of like walking and escorting the convoy, on foot sort of, and they're kind of just, and it was impressive. It was to me, I was saying that was the thoughts that were going through my mind. It was very impressive to kind of watch it, and everybody was very focused, and it was kind of just like a certain, focus and everything, and it was just pretty impressive to see, in that sense, and so that was just some stuff that kind of popped out at me, and then I spoke a lot on the 2 hours, but that one mission later in the deployment, and it was just like, wow, like in terms of, and I'm sure some of those gunners were maybe Alpha Company and so forth. I mean, I actually don't think they were, but I'm sure that probably went down the same way with Alpha Company, or even just support company, regular, whatever, gunners. But just a really kind of basic, but at the same time, just it kind of to this day like perplexes me, the whole thing, and but it's just, I kind of said everything I wanted to say about that. I don't know how much you really want to jump into that, but it was quite the it was quite the thing to see, and to be honest, to be part of it, I guess, because I'll tell you what, I did hear from somebody on your platoon, and they said, and I don't know if this is completely true, but this is what they told me. They said they wouldn't have been off the base if it wasn't for us. In other words, they were there to do, security for that, just like any security. Let's just say in the U.S., if your VIP isn't going out to the club or whatever, or to the event, you don't need to do anything. So, but that was maybe something I did actually jot down a few questions. So, was your platoon doing, somebody had mentioned, perhaps you were doing other missions besides 9th ESB?
Yeah, we escorted an admiral before, and it was a little bit of a hairy place that we went through. Suskin was doing some other stuff with another unit. We were also helping provide security for some OPs being built over where the MIT team was, over by the OK Corral. So there was multiple things that we were doing, and yeah, we were providing support and security for other areas.
Maybe an Army unit one time, or a few times.
One was actually a admiral, so that would be the Navy.
That's what I knew that when you said admiral, that was the Navy. But somebody had mentioned something about an Army unit maybe, or I don't know if it was National Guard or Army active duty, but it was some sort of Army unit you guys did some work with.
We did, and also the military transition as far as the Iraqi Army, where they were actually working with the SEALs, SEAL Team 5, over by the OK Corral. We did a few different operations with people.
Okay. And were you? You don't have to answer this if you don't want, but somebody had mentioned that you guys were perhaps doing some stuff with Black Hawk helicopters, and you were doing raids, and or is that not accurate?
So, what Staff Sergeant Suskin was doing, and also Matt Bishop, they were doing some other things. They were doing some recon. They flew out of TQ. They went over to, again, like I said, Habbaniyah. They were doing some other areas and research. We did do a raid on a gas station one time before. So we were doing, or Staff Sergeant Suskin and Matt were doing something different, some other areas. But yeah.
And would they bring sometimes people from your platoon with them?
If they did, I was unaware of it.
Okay. I mean, just curious. It doesn't. This many years, it doesn't really matter. I'm just curious. When the Lance Corporal Underground, you hear stuff. Sometimes you're not there. You hear stuff, and it's like you wonder. You're like, is it true? Is it not true? And somebody tells you stuff, and you're okay. You file it away. But the recesses of the brain. But so with regard to the SEALs, was that the reason why they were doing some of the Overwatch, some of the sniper Overwatch for 9th ESB, was because they worked with security platoon, or was it just some sort of kind of work order that was put in, sort of, and they were the one that picked it up?
So when we were over by the OK Corral, north of the Euphrates, they wanted to expand their reach with observation posts. And it was an area that was heavily grassed and treed. So the SEALs in their SPIT team, which is the Iraqi Army, they consider the Iraqi Special Forces, they were providing overwatch because that area was known for having different types of complex attacks. They were providing over there, and then also even using us to be able to draw out other enemy combatants.
What was the first word you said? Using what again?
To draw us out?
No, I thought you said like hostage or something.
Nope, I did not say hostage.
Okay. Got you. Yeah, it's that makes sense. Yeah, it didn't seem like there was ever a complex attack, but like I said, a very narrow vantage point that I basically had. It seemed to me that it was, I mean, who knows? Who really knows? At least from my point of view, it was so hard to really tell what the full picture was. It seemed to me individuals, but yeah, it obviously, when you're just kind of static like that, it would be probably a good way to work together with other people, and definitely a possibility of that. Even overrunning the whole thing, potentially. Not that it ever came to that, but with the first, so somebody even had mentioned all these like different like random stories. They said that once you guys were in an 8-hour firefight, and you kept calling for help and from help, other units, everything, but nobody would come basically, and eventually, I guess you were able to get out of there. Is that something that you were a part of, or is that even accurate?
I don't know anything about that.
Okay. Gotcha. Yeah, so basically, like I had said on the other podcast, it was a very pivotal aspect of 9th ESB, because as much as I guess you could say, if you wanted to say it this way, hey, you guys wouldn't have been off the base, let's say hypothetically, if it wasn't for us, because you weren't maybe doing patrolling or traditional infantry or offensive tactics. Typically, it was defensive in nature, so you kind of were in a way like security, like you were like escorting us, and our guardian angel is our kind of force field. But at the same time, I don't think the other side could have existed without not just security platoon, but any of the offensive nature type of stuff, any of the military defensive, whatever you want to call it, the gunners, all that kind of stuff. It would not have existed. It would not have existed because you couldn't. It just wouldn't happen. And honestly, from my point of view, there was so much time spent on it. I mean, can you imagine how much more we could have gotten done if we didn't have to worry about that kind of stuff, right? Not to mention the stuff getting destroyed and messed up after the fact. But I'm saying, like, just think about a construction crew in the United States. A lot of it was very similar kind of stuff, right? But if you didn't have to worry about, constantly having to take breaks and run because of mortars and all this kind of manpower that was put into it, maybe the most that you deal with is kind of the cones and the traffic control and all that kind of stuff over here. But, and obviously that's war, of course, so I'm not like complaining about it, but I'm just saying, just to think about. So it was a very pivotal, a very important part of the unit. And I sometimes think maybe a little bit overlooked. I don't know. I mean, not that awards are everything, but, I mean, in some ways, like if somebody has a mortar tube and they're about to mortar the unit and somebody kills them with a machine gun, wouldn't you think that person would get, like, what is it, the NAM with a V? Right? Wouldn't that be the award that would be? I mean, I'm just throwing it out there as an idea. I don't know. Maybe I'm barking up the wrong tree with that, but
it depends on what they actually look at it, because there's some people that have taken over Nest and they got bronze stars or silver stars. Some people, not talking about my unit, I'm talking about just in general. So it depends on the severity and the complexity of how the person's actions got it.
Yeah, I know. And I know we weren't doing this stuff for awards, and that wasn't what anybody was really interested in, and it didn't really matter, but it was just something to think about. Yeah, okay, so we spent a lot on that first deployment. I don't know how deep we really got into it, but that's okay. We're trying. All right, so the second deployment. So how much longer after did you do that out of Oki or out of where were you out of? Where was your unit out of? The BTT.
I went to Camp Pendleton for several months, and then I got sent to a advisor training group. I did about 2.5 days worth of workup with them. Went over to St. Louis, Arizona, learned a little bit about how the Border Patrol does stuff, got geared up, went home on leave. And then I went on to what they considered a border transition team. There was another team that went with a port of entry team, and there was several other bit teams as well. And I was in Camp Pendleton probably for about 5 months, I think, before I got sent out again.
You're on mute. Oh, you got it off. You took it off. Were you an individual augment to this team? You were?
So going to a advisor training group, you are augmented out from different battalions, and they're sent over there. And typically, the role that I did was a master sergeant role as an E4, which is an E8 billet. And what I was doing was training Iraqis how to do telecommunications and military tactics.
Wow. Yeah, so that was that was in 2007 beginning, something
Correct.
Like that?
2007 to 2008.
And how many months after, was that about a 7-month deployment?
That was about a 7-month deployment.
And at the end of that, how many months until you got out of the Marines?
I think I got back in March, and then 5 months later I was out of the Marine Corps.
So did you go back to your parent unit?
I did. So I went to my parent unit. They were originally going to send me to a different company because they knew I was getting ready to get out of the Marine Corps, and they were going to have me just cut grass for the next several months.
Oh, froze up.
But after my master sergeant telling them about what I just did and what I did on my first tour, because my first tour I got an M with a Combat V, my second tour I got a Navy Com. And when I was telling him about what I did as far as operations, he was like, "No, you're going to help train some of these people."
Oh, so you did get a NAM with a Combat V on the 2006 deployment?
I did.
Oh, okay. So, all right. Look, I was complaining for nothing.
No, there's no reason to complain. To me, it took me a while to be able to look at the awards and stuff, because you're doing a job in a time that's extremely difficult for a person, and learning how to understand the emotions of what actually happens. And like you were telling me about how you saw the war or how you saw the first operation. What I seen was different. Like even when I was explaining, or when you were asking the questions about calling in support, it was like it was still very hard for you to be able to grasp at one point, to be able to say like, yeah, these are the things that were needed for me, the complexity of it, instead of just being a saw gunner or I was also a radio operator, and knowing when to talk and when to start chirping, and when to be able to provide overwatch and when to be able to return fire. It was definitely a lot different, and we did a lot of different types of training. But my second tour, we were embedded with Iraqis, teaching them how to learn how to talk on the radios, because you teach a man how to fish, he can fish a life. If you feed a man a fish, he can only eat for a day.
Yeah, that's brilliant. That's brilliant. It's all your perspective. It's all your perspective, and I mean, at least for me, I probably get very solidified with whatever my perspective is on something, and that's and then it might not even be accurate, what my perspective is or whatever I thought, but I'm so solidified with it. I mean, I did see a lot of the MIT team, military transition team, that 2006 deployment, and yeah, they were teaching them. It was a lot of military tactics that they were teaching them, patrolling and knowing how to be on foot in a kind of like a military movement on foot, and properly doing that. And was that a part of your? I know you were kind of specific to doing communication, but were the military tactics a part of it as well?
So over doing the BIT team, we were showing them how to do surveillance over by the border of Syria and Iraq. We were also teaching them how to leapfrog, how to actually be able to move around with their own vehicles, how to be able to have sectors of fire, and how to be able to communicate with each other, not only with radios, but hand-arm signals.
Interesting. Wow. Yeah, it's now in terms of your day-to-day life, were you, your sleeping situation and so forth, were you kind of or eating, was it kind of hand in hand with the Iraqis, or kind of back and forth a little bit?
So we lived on a compound where it was an Iraqi battalion army, and we had this little area where it was just for the Marines, and we had our own little trailers that we would be able to poop in bags. We didn't have running water. We had running water that was non-potable, so we would be able to use it to wash our hands, but we had to use bottled water to be able to brush our teeth. The individuals, so they were right across from the Haskell barriers. We used to use the same piss tubes. We had a lot of the similarities, and almost every day we were actually going back out and working with Iraqis. But we had our main cop that we would go back to, which had like a little section between us and the Iraqi Army.
Like that sounds pretty similar to what I saw with the mid team. So some of the things were similar. They definitely always wanted their sleeping area to be separate. They were very specific that only Marines were to enter their berthing area, their sleeping area, and so forth, and similarities with things like that. Yeah, but was there any like I said with they were doing the mid team that I would go around with. It was that dismounted kind of patrols, but they were doing quite a bit of a mounted patrolling, meaning in Humvees. Were you guys doing anything like that? I guess you were. You're saying you're doing the leapfrogging, and that's basically like a mounted patrol type of technique, correct?
Correct. It's actually not the leapfrogging would be dismounted.
Oh, that would be dismounted. Okay.
Yeah, the thing I'm up, you see me, I'm down. Where you have a split second, and then you can be able to move, especially while you're being engaged, and being able to approach an enemy with aggression, and being able to keep moving forward instead of being pinned down. But we also taught them actually how to operate vehicles as far as moving, why is actually important. We were going to small little areas as far as towns, and we would meet with, I'm trying to remember the guy's name, and then also having the Iraqi commanders of the post to actually have influence in those little areas as well, so they can keep eyes on.
Interesting. What was the BTT team? Was it primarily infantry? Was that Marine infantry? Was that sort of the what was the makeup of it?
It was a hodgepodge of people. Like my major, he was actually from 7th DSB. We had a S6, which was me. We had S2, which was another. It was another officer. We had a few different areas. It was only 11 of us. So, yep.
Huh.
And it was very different because of how we had to relay the information, how much security, how much of our own security that we had, all of our gear that we had. So it was people from different fields that came together to work on one transition team.
Huh. And these combat outposts. Well, I guess the one that you were at was maybe different. I'm not sure the makeup of that, but the ones that the Iraqis were mainly at, they didn't have Marine infantry or Army infantry that were at those outposts. It was just Iraqi Army.
So, the COP North, where I was, it was Marines, and then they also had the Iraqi Army. COP South had Marines, and they also had the Iraqi Army. The Poet had Marines there, which is also the call sign Waleed, and the Port of Entry, and then they also had other TTs over there, transition teams. But it was what they were there for to do was be an advisor, and an advisor not to be such the engaged or the ones that are actually being the brunt, but the ones that are teaching and mentoring and being able to show, so that the individuals would be able to do the job without us. Being an advisor is the fact of making sure that we're extremely fireable, so people will be able to live life without us.
Got it. Yeah. I mean, it might have been similar to sort of the setup of the ones that I went around. Did you end up seeing any of the stuff from the 2006 deployment? Did you ever end up in any of those areas again?
No, because where I was in 2006, we went to Fallujah, Ramadi. We went through desert area to heavily wooded area to MSR Iron, which was an extremely hot spot, to a bunch of different areas. And where I was northwest of Al-Qaim, and I went to Al-Qaim or AQ sometimes to be able to get resupplies. But our main job was to actually be on the border over the northwest province of Anabar and teaching Iraqis. So we weren't doing the same type of military advisement or like the security what we were doing back in 2006. This was a totally different role.
Uh-huh. But there was there still a need to protect yourself in the same type of way?
Of course, you were living with people that you did not know. You had to sometimes take away washing machine timers from people. You had to make sure that you were checking to see if there's any type of explosives. Always had to have a 9mm with me at all times, and always had to be ready to rock and roll. You got to remember there was only 11 of us, and then there was another transition team on the fob, but we were severely outnumbered, and so the threat was always there. The threat in numbers was always there, but it's the if anything, going back to say like TQ, where you can't have a weapon always in condition 1. We always had the condition. We always had at least condition 3 to condition 1 on the fob, and because we were just ready to rock and roll at all times.
But in terms of when you were going from point A to point B, or if you were, static somewhere off the base or whatever, did you feel like the same sort of? I understand that with regard to Iraqi Army, but let's say from the populace, did you feel the same type of threat, or did you encounter the same type of threats?
It was kind of similar landscape in the way of MSR Long Island, which was main supply route Long Island. It was more desert-like. We interacted with Bedouins in certain areas. We interacted with people of cities. And yeah, we had to be more on the alert because, again, there was only 11 of us, 3 gun trucks. And the fact is that we didn't have the same type of support that we had in other areas. We were in more remote areas. We were more integrated with people. And we had to trust in what we were able to do, and then also trust that people wanted to get better. Because at any time we're going through some of these little cities, that things could have happened. Or instead of actually having multiple gun trucks where we were doing at least 4 to 8. And this one we only run it with 3 people with 3 gun trucks. So it was a very, very different type of stressors.
Yeah. How about in terms of IED threat? Was that kind of similar or just varied?
The IED threat was very different from 2006 to 2008 because in 2008 when we were leaving, they started allowing Iraqis to go in and out of our convoys. And the VBIDs in 2006, vehicle-blown IEDs, about blowing themselves up and causing catastrophic damage, like MSR Long Island, they did more pressure plates. You're going through MSR Michigan, you're heading west. They had pressure plates, and then they had daisy chains. They also had radio frequency IEDs. Yeah, if you go north of over the, what was it called? North of Cop North, you had the lollipop IEDs where they used to take gasoline and then open up the holes and then put like a mortar or 155 round in there to be able to make it explosive and then hide it back with a little bit of tar. So they were just, the IED threat was different, but it was still there.
So you weren't able to, if somebody was trying to cut into the convoy, you couldn't engage the vehicle.
By the time that we left in 2008,
wow.
No.
Interesting. Yeah. So you did mention, you said, well, you only spent about 12 months in garrison in terms of, does that include like Paris Island and your job school also? Wow.
Yep.
Wow. So pretty much 3 years of your
about 12. It was
well,
about,
7 months, but there's the workup and there's the
So when I think about it, I think about not garrison, but actually being in the States. So in the States, as far as leave, Paris Island, garrison in California, and but I just went to the Philippines, Korea, Japan, Iraq twice.
I see. Yeah, I forgot about all that. I forgot that you had went. Were you at Camp Mujak in Korea?
I was. I went there a little bit after I went to Camp Rodriguez.
Okay. Camp Rodriguez is not in South Korea. It's in the Philippines, right?
No, Camp Rodriguez it's over in Korea. It's a army base where they were doing some type of workup for to go back to Iraq or to go to Iraq with this unit. I was actually more of the rear, and then that's when we switched out from the communicators to, and then we took over that area.
Meaning, the U.S. was using the base to train to go to Iraq, or the South Korean military.
And that 9th ESB.
Oh, so it wasn't Korea. The Koreans weren't going over.
Nope,
Okay.
it was us.
Okay, I didn't know that part of it. I guess I just remember Fuji, Mount Fuji. Did you go to Mount Fuji? Wow, wow. Okay, interesting. So, So when we were all on leave, was that when you went to South Korea to do that workup?
No, so after the Philippines, I went to South Korea. The 9th ESB went over to South Korea to go do the training over in Rodriguez. And then after we spent some time in Rodriguez, we went up to Camp Mujuk. And then people went on leave right before we went to Iraq. And it was a lot of people went on leave right during Christmas time of 2005.
Yeah, it's interesting. Well, so what was the reason? Was it because you weren't originally supposed to be? That was why you didn't do Fuji.
No, I didn't know anything about Fuji.
Huh. That's interesting. I know there was a lot of, even when we were at Fuji, it was constantly like, it might have been, they didn't even, I can't remember. I know there was a lot of back and forth, not just the Lance Corporal Underground, but even what they were actually telling us, like the actual, bosses, in terms of like if we were even going, if we weren't going, and then they had, two different groups, because it was like a rear detachment, and then when we came back to Hanson, there was a group from 9th ESB that then went. And they must have been kind of combined with another ESB that was, I think, like the main group, from my understanding. That's what I remember. So some of those guys that were maybe the rear detachment, they might have actually done Fuji. I'm not exactly sure, but I wouldn't doubt it. Like, they might have actually went. And then there were specific cases. Like there was somebody that, he was married, or he had a girlfriend or something, and he got nervous. He didn't want to go. I think he might have been like a security platoon guy. They obviously not intrinsically, but they, put him on there, and then he basically. I don't know if he went that second deployment, but then he, I don't know if it was like a medical reason or whatever reason, but he didn't end up going the deployment that we went, and somebody else, so to say, took his spot. So there was a lot of moving parts. It definitely was, and I wasn't, privy to all of what was going on, because you kind of just catch it like in bits and pieces. As I'm sure you remember, it's definitely not. But yeah, it was when I was at Pendleton. I actually wanted to go to Iraq a second time, believe it or not. But when I got to Pendleton, the unit was already there, so I was part of the remain behind element, which was like this small kind of element. And do I even remember them coming back? I guess they did. They all came back, but for me to, so to say, go with that unit to Iraq, I would have had to re-enlist. It wouldn't have worked out, because when they left, was right around when I was getting out, basically, or maybe even after. So, I would have had to basically re-enlist in order to go with them, which I wasn't going to do. So that was the story. But how did you end up? was that something you had to volunteer for? That team? Was it something like in your unit, people came around and they kind of put out word and they said, "Hey, we're looking for individual augmentees to kind of leave the unit and to go on to this battalion training team," or how did you find out about that?
So the way that it happened was I remember talking to the lieutenant in my comm shop, and I was telling him, "Hey, I want to go back overseas. Just put me back on anything. I'm ready to go back." And I had an episode with one of my sergeants when he wanted to do drill, and I actually snapped at him. And I told him that's how you get people killed. And the lamp actually had me go see somebody medically. And one of the guys that was actually out of my comm shop, he was on this transition team workup, and he got, actually there's two of them, and both of them, one was driving a motorcycle without a license and insurance on base and got caught, and another one got DUI. And he asked if actually Gunnery Sergeant Rigsby comes into the office and said, "Who has a problem with Corporal Fruin?" And then all of a sudden he asked me, he said, "Who do you have a problem with?" And I'm like wondering what's happening. Like, is this an OIG thing? And he told me, he's like, "Well, hey, like I said, everything's clear." He said, "Well, get your bags packed. You're going to go meet us over into Yuma Proving Grounds over in Arizona, which is different than Yuma Air Base." And I ended up actually just going with them.
Wow, interesting. Yeah, that's pretty cool. That's pretty cool. Yeah, I definitely wasn't really pushing for it when I was in California. And at the same time, there wasn't really any. It didn't really seem like there was any opportunities like that. I didn't really look for them, but it from what I remember, there wasn't any. I was in a. Was the unit you were a part of, your home unit? Was it a communications unit, or what type of unit was it?
It was some type of regiment, combat logistics regiment, and then I really felt like it was kind of not the pace that I needed. At that time in my life, I wanted to get back into the mix. I was actually missing being overseas, having a purpose, and I missed actually the brotherhood. And being back in such a unit, it felt too slow for me, and I didn't feel like I belonged. So I was lucky enough to go to this transition team, and it was a very, very different type of perspective. I would actually look at myself as more of a field marine than a garrison marine, so it was just a different experience.
Interesting. Yeah, no, I mean, for me, it was the unit I was in was called 1st LAR, Light Armored Reconnaissance. It's not reconnaissance at all. I thought that before I went there. I was like, oh, it's recon. No, it's not. That's just the name. But it is an infantry unit. It's mechanized infantry. So for me, I was just kind of so I don't know, enthralled with the fact that it was, at least at first, that it was an infantry unit that I don't know. I didn't really. It also didn't really hit me. I guess the fact that, like, hey, unless I re-enlist, that deployment was pretty much it. That didn't hit me until after I got out. So when I was there for that year, it was like, I was going through the motions, and there was a bit of field, not Iraq field, but we would go up to Fort Irwin. I don't know if you know Fort Irwin. It's like an army base in the desert, kind of central or northern California or something. And we would camp out in our vehicles for weeks at a time and stuff like that. So there was a lot of humps, and living out on Camp Pendleton, we'd be outside a lot, and it was stuff that I wasn't used to from 9th ESB. Maybe in Iraq, but I'm saying in terms of like being an Okie, I wasn't used to that kind of stuff. Being outdoors a lot and all that kind of stuff. It's still garrison, but it was just a different field garrison, I guess you could call it, but it was just kind of a different sort of vibe, than I was used to. But anyways, so did you feel like that second deployment did it give you what you were looking for in terms of, you were looking for that? And I could kind of get that, especially with what you were doing that first deployment, that being back with a regiment, and you're not, you're not so, like I said earlier, an hour ago, so vital and so needed. Were you kind of looking for something of that nature again?
I was actually missing I'm missing war. I was missing combat. I was missing actually being engaged. I was missing feeling alive. And going back to a place that was so slow, it didn't actually make sense to me.
Did you feel like that was that you found it with the BTT team?
What I found with the BTT team was actually they played by big boy rules. They expected you to show up. You bring your own stuff. You weren't being micromanaged. You made sure you got shit done. What I found with them, I liked that area, but it wasn't the same type of craziness as it was my first time. So it was just a lot slower.
Interesting. Yeah, it's that's interesting. I kind of got that feeling from just sort of the way you explained it. But so did you was the slowness of it a disappointment to you, or at all?
So if you talk about the time periods, when I was that young guy at 22, turning 23, of course it was a disappointment. But as an adult looking back on it, I realized that it was a huge advantage to be able to do such a role. And the different seasons of our life, we look at things differently. And you got to remember, I'm dealing with PTSD at this time, and it's just looking for something to keep me alive.
Yeah. No, it definitely makes sense. To maybe try to tie it together. I mean, this is your thing, but I guess I'll just moderate it because I want to try to wrap it up. Kind of tie it together, and I could kind of see that you really, because I've heard that from a lot of people what you're kind of saying, and I kind of felt it myself in different times in my life, that you are really needed. I mean, I didn't have that same type of role that you did with security, but in terms of being part of that element and being in really kind of a target, it is a certain adrenaline rush, it is. So there's kind of that factor, but also when I worked at the hospital, that you really do feel a part of something. There is a camaraderie factor, but it's more than that. That it's you're really needed. You're not just going through the paces. You're not just staying alive to stay alive. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but you're just kind of you really are needed. You really are, even though you maybe are a cog in a wheel, you're really vital to the situation. So, but I guess, at least in my little summation, in life, we're not always able to, dictate always how we do that, or we try to, and it doesn't always end up working out like that, So, and of course, like you said, the way you view it, immediately or right afterwards versus 20 years later is different, But in terms of, we can't always, maybe you sign up. I'll just give you an example. I have a cousin of mine. I guess he's a second cousin, and he was in the Marines the same time. We were actually in the same unit when we were in California, believe it or not, which is crazy. So anyways, he was in Oki. He was a 03. He was an infantry guy, and he was a sergeant in Oki, and he was with like a unit out of Foster or something like that. I get you, he was like their training NCO or something, and he called me up. I had one of those Japanese cell phones. I don't know if you remember those cell phones you would load up with minutes or whatever. And he called me, and he was like, "Hey, do you want to go on the a MIT team?" He was going to go on some sort of MIT team to Afghanistan. This is like right after Iraq. and I was at range control, Camp Hansen, and I was all about it. I was like, oh yeah, I'm ready to go. He said, oh, I told him all about you. You're a utilities guy. We could use a utilities guy to, I don't know, whatever, run the advise in the towns on the power. I don't know, and it never came to fruition. He never even went on it. It all just, I don't even know if it was a real thing to begin with. Who knows? But obviously I was like searching, for something. Maybe I wanted, whatever I didn't get out of that Iraq deployment. Maybe I wanted to try to find that in that deployment there, or whatever. But, like we spoke about before, it's not always in our control, how we, the situations we're in, or even what situations we create or whatever. We do as much as we can, and sometimes we think we want something, and then we don't even really want it. That's like another thing. But I guess at least the older guys, the Vietnam vets and stuff, what they always tell me is like how we think about stuff or deal with stuff today. That's really the most important thing. So I know before I was saying, well, it's the story that's important, and I think that it is. The story is important, but maybe it's important to understand, where we're at now, and that, like I said, for the public, because we do got to understand what war does to people, but also just for ourselves, and how do we deal with the experiences that we went through. How do we deal with them? How do we think about it? And a lot of people have different approaches, but find what works for you, and I think go with that. In fact, somebody today came up to me because she saw I had a military discount on my kid's class that he was going to today, and she said, "Oh, she's 19, she's in ROTC, and she wants to drop out of ROTC in college and go active duty." And she's like, "Can you give me some advice? Like, what should I do? Can you give me some?" And I said, you gotta, this is only something you're gonna be able to figure. I talked it through with her, but I said, I told her, I'm like, you want to know something? I said, I was 18 years old, I was a senior in high school, and I literally had the same thought. I knew I didn't want to go officer, but it was, am I gonna go to college, or am I gonna go active duty? That was for me, those were my choices. And I knew it was a binary choice. And a lot of times in life is a binary choice. So it could even be just like you said with dealing with PTSD, that you come back and you're at Pendleton, and not to say that was the wrong choice. Right? I'm not that it was a great choice, but how do we deal with whatever emotions? Just like I tell my kids, having an emotion is not a bad thing, right? That's what all the mental health people, you're a mental health guy. That's what they always say. There's nothing wrong with having an emotion. You feel anger, you feel like, oh, I'm missing out, FOMO. I'm missing out on the war. I want to try to do what I did with security. I want to be at the tip of the spear where I got 60 people that are relying on me, relying on my team, calling for fire, really this like real deal stuff. How am I going to find that again? And so that's the emotion, but, can you imagine having that emotion when you're, let's say 38 years old? That's a hard thing to do. Are you going to try to find that through drinking or a motorcycle or whatever, and it's hard to do. And I think we got to try to do it. It's not just giving up and saying, oh, we're never going to find it again, but it's maybe just, it's maybe the slow road. Maybe we still do it, but we do it now in a slower, in a more contained way, and maybe in the way of, there's an old adage that a man that controls his anger is stronger than one that has conquered a whole city. It's an old saying, and maybe that's another answer, because at least for me, that's something that I've dealt with is anger. And I've always felt like, not that I want to blame it all on Iraq, but that was a place where sometimes anger was condoned, or it was even promoted. That type of energy that it was put into that anger. Where I was working at the hospital and there was detainees, and we were dealing with them in just a very we would go red, so to say. We would just and that was acceptable, and that was even promoted. And then maybe you're, like you said, maybe you're not there in TQ anymore. Maybe now you're at Pendleton. Well, can you still use that same type of energy? Maybe yes, maybe no. Maybe not that to the extreme. And then when you leave Pendleton and you're out of the Marine Corps and you're dealing with somebody in the general public, how do you go about it? Because there's always more than one way, obviously. I think we can all agree, to deal with a situation. The emotion isn't bad, but how do we deal with that emotion? And that ties into PTSD, because I know, at least at the VA that I used to work at years ago, there was the mental health, wing. They had like a sign and stuff. And then there was the old signage. It was called the Life Skills Department. And the VA there, believe it or not, it was a half Navy, half VA facility. They had a life skills department, supposedly, with a whole curriculum and people that would teach people about life skills. And then they kind of morphed more into just mental health. But some of the clinicians used to say, well, I wish they still had life skills, which because we gotta teach each other, and ourselves, how do we how do we do that? Because obviously we can't use the same type of techniques that were necessarily being used during our military time. So that was my little rant.
Some good questions. I think we should pick that up a different day. But I think those are some great questions. I think another time that when we get together, we'll talk about that a little bit more in depth.
Definitely. I really appreciate you, Will, sharing your story today. It's really an honor. It's really an honor, and I appreciate you reaching out to me when you reached out to me before, and then we're able to do this. And let's keep moving it forward in the future, for sure.
Sounds good, Mr.
All right,
Ben.
Will. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.